Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the Global Status of CCS 2022 report. I'm Guloren Turan. I'm the General Manager of Advocacy at the Global CCS Institute. The Institute is a think tank, is an leading international think tank with over 160 members, and our mission is to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture and storage as one of the key vital technologies to address climate change. Each year, we release our annual flagship publication, the Global Status of CCS report, which tracks key milestones for carbon capture and storage over the previous 12 months. Next slide, please. Today, we'll present the report and we'll hear from speakers from the UK, US, and from the European Union on how CCS is progressing in their countries and in their regions. As always, we would like to hear from you. If you have any questions today, either to ourselves at the Institute or to our speakers, please use Zoom's Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll look forward to connecting with you after the webinar. During the webinar or after the webinar, feel free to share your thoughts, your comments on social media, and you can find the handle and the hashtag on the upper right corner on the slide here. With that, I would like to introduce the Institute CEO, Mr. Jarad Daniels, to give his introductory remarks. Over to you, Jarad.
Great. Well, thank you, Guloren. And hello, and thank you for joining the Global CCS Institute today for the launch of our annual status report. The theme of our report this year is ambition to action. We feel this theme encapsulates both the incredible growth and demand for CCS we've seen this past year, as well as the urgency of continued investment that's required to meet our ambitious climate goals. There is no silver bullet solution to climate change, but perhaps we can think of CCS as a Swiss Army knife part of the solution, as a helpful tool that can serve multiple unique roles in helping to decarbonize the global economy. For example, when it comes to essential industries like cement and chemical production, there's no other viable path for deep decarbonization other than CCS. The latest scientific analysis from organizations like the International Energy Agency and the IPCC confirm the importance of incorporating CCS in climate mitigation. In fact, the science shows that reaching our shared climate goals is practically impossible without its help. The good news is that CCS is a mature, well-understood technology that is increasingly commercially competitive across the full value chain, from capture to storage. We're also seeing strengthening of government policy support for CCS across the world. For example, in the US, early analysis suggests that the new Inflation Reduction Act could increase the deployment of CCS by on the order of 13-fold, or well over 100 million ton per annum of additional CCS projects by 2030, compared to the prior existing policy. In Canada, the 2022 federal budget includes a CCUS tax credit, and a CCUS strategy is under development there. In Europe, there's much solid progress. For example, the Danish government has committed 5 billion euro for CCS over the next 10 years. And in the Asia-Pacific region, Thailand announced its first CCS project, and China commenced operations at its first million-ton per annum project this year. And this is just a small sampling of the many positive CCS developments that have occurred in this past 12 months. And with 61 new facilities added to the project pipeline in 2022, we don't expect this momentum behind CCS to slow down anytime soon, which is a very good thing. Some of the key trends accelerating the deployment of CCS, which we've noted in our status report, include government efforts toward establishing effective regulatory environments and CCS incentivizing policies, industry models that support capital investment, such as hubs and CCS networks, increased interest from the financial sector to incorporate CCS in their investment strategies, ESG considerations, and green taxonomies, unprecedented engagement in direct air capture with CCS, or DACs, with literally billions of dollars in funding allocated to scale up this essential technology, and as well as an uptick in clean hydrogen and other low carbon fuels, with dozens of blue hydrogen projects now in development around the world. So in sum, it's never been a better time for CCS. Our report finds that in the past 12 months, the CO2 capture capacity of all the CCS facilities under development has grown to 244 million ton per annum, which is an impressive growth of 44% compared to the prior year. But global efforts to reduce emissions, including investment in CCS, are still grossly inadequate overall. Government policy must be met with private capital to unlock the full potential of CCS and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, which makes this decade absolutely critical time to move from ambition to action, which brings us full circle back to the overarching theme of the report. So now I'd like to turn it back over to my colleague Guloren Turan, General Manager for Advocacy, and our colleague Jeff Erickson, General Manager for Client Engagement, to dive deeper into this year's findings, after which we'll hear some brief remarks from three industry and policy experts. So over to you, Guloren.
Thank you so much, Jarad. Thank you for those remarks. Thank you. So as Jarad mentioned, we have seen very promising growth in the CCS facility pipeline, both in those facilities that are in operation and under development, and the pipeline continued to grow for the fourth year in a row now. Today, the CCS pipeline capacity, pipeline can capture and store, has a capacity for 244 million tons per annum. And as Jarad mentioned, that's a 44% increase from last year, from 2021. Driving that momentum, particularly in North America and in Europe, were enhancements made to CCS policy and funding mechanisms. We also saw CCS projects and ambitions progress in the APAC and MENA regions, and we'll look to unpack the developments in these regions in the coming slides. And I'd like to remind everybody that despite the significant progress, despite the excitement and the ambition and the momentum that we have felt in 2022 in CCS to achieve our net zero goals, CCS capacity must increase by more than 100-fold by 2050. Next, please. Here is the chart of the CCS pipeline, the CCS facility pipeline of facilities that are operating in construction and in various stages of development. Today, there are 30 operating commercial facilities around the world. This is supported by commercial facilities, 11 of them that are under construction, and more than 150 of them in various stages of development. The cumulative capacity of all the CCS facilities in the pipeline, including 2 that have suspended operations, is 244 million tons per annum. And actually, as we're pulling together these slides and getting ready to present, we were discussing amongst ourselves that there are many more facilities that are in development right now. And in fact, it's probably not an exaggeration to say that new projects are being announced to the public almost every week. Next, please. So what's driving this growth, the substantial growth in CCS? We see 3 interrelated demand factors. Firstly, it's the demand for greenhouse gas emission reductions in line with net zero commitments from governments and businesses, together with rising expectations from the civil society. Secondly, the ongoing demand for products that are critical to human and economic development, including in energy, fertilizers, steel, cement, and chemicals, and to deliver these products in a low or zero carbon way. Thirdly, the demand for economic prosperity and a just transition as we move towards a net zero economy. CCS is the common factor, or in other words, is at the center of the Venn diagram that you see on the left-hand slide of this chart, that is in common to all these demand drivers. Next, please. So this map illustrates where CCS facilities, commercial CCS facilities, are operating at the moment. As I mentioned, globally, there are 30 CCS facilities in operation with a capacity to capture and store more than around 43 million tons of CO2 per year. As we look at this map, obviously the leadership of North America is visibly clear, with there are 18 operating facilities in this region, 13 in the United States and 5 in Canada. There are 4 operating facilities in Europe, 2 of them in Norway, 1 in Hungary and 1 in Iceland, and Australia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE each host 1 facility, and China hosting 3 facilities. Next, please. And this is a map of all commercial CCS facilities, either in construction or in various stages of development. Compared to the previous map, which only showed those facilities that are operating, this map of the CCS facilities that are in the development pipeline demonstrates, I think quite visibly, the increased geographic reach and geographic distribution of CCS facilities that are to come online in the future. As Jarad mentioned, in 2022, we saw 61 new CCS facilities added to the project pipeline, and today 26 countries have commercial CCS and DACS facilities, either in operation or under development. Next, please. So when we look at the significant developments that took place in the last 12 months, I think the first and foremost is the coming online of 4 new facilities. In fact, these facilities are all in different countries. They're in Canada, China, Iceland, and US. And we're seeing the first commercial DACS facility in operation, as well as the first post-combustion, again, gas with CCS facility. So these facilities are the Red Trail Energy ethanol in the US, the Glacier gas plant as a post-combustion gas facility in Canada. We've got, of course, Orca, the DACS, direct air carbon capture and storage facility in Iceland, and Sinopec's Huilu petrochemicals facility in China. Again, 4 new facilities starting operation in 2022. Further to these projects, the new facilities that came online, we now have 11 facilities in construction that will be becoming operational in the next few years. The release of the Global CCS report always allows us an opportunity to look globally across the countries and regions to assess what's been going on in terms of policy and project progress. And I think it's worth to say that in the last 12 months, we saw a number of countries, specifically Canada, Denmark, and US, that put forward some very strong policy and financing frameworks for CCS. Versus in other jurisdictions, in other regions, we see perhaps the private sector perhaps playing the more of a lead role in progressing new projects. And perhaps this is the case in Australia. We'd like to propose Australia, Iceland, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the UK. And finally, there are a number of countries, additional number of countries who have their first new CCS facilities in development for the first time. So these are countries that are entering the CCS landscape, so to speak. And these are Germany, Finland, France, and Timor-Leste. Next, please. Now, I think this is a slide that's going to be a lot of interest to a lot of people, because we have been for a long time receiving a lot of questions on storage, CO2 storage. Looking at, and this is the type of course, geological storage. Looking at the existing facilities, we know that more than half of them used enhanced oil recovery as their storage type. And whilst effectively all CO2 that is injected for EOR is permanently trapped in the pore space that previously held oil, when we look at the future, we see that the majority of future storage will not be associated with EOR across the world. So at the Institute, we analyzed storage type data derived from over 150 CCS facilities, including commercial and demonstration projects. And this is more on this is in our status report. But the chart on the right-hand side shows a subset of this data. It's more than 100 facilities that are commercial and that are all under development. So the chart does not have any facility that's currently operating. And this analysis shows that deep saline formations will become the most common type of CO2 storage reservoirs across all storage facilities, commercial storage facilities in development. We also see that storage and depleted and oil and gas reservoirs is also set to become more common, for example, in the UK, in Australia, and in Southeast Asia. This shows us that more and more project developers are now able to make a business case for CCS without the revenue created through EOR. So CCS is becoming commercial without the revenue enhancements that were needed in the past through enhanced oil recovery. It's also worth noting that projects are getting bigger, facilities are getting bigger. Traditionally, in the past, the existing facilities had the capacity to capture and inject around 1 million tons, 1.2, 1.3 million tons of CO2 per annum. However, some storage facilities that are in development aim to capture and inject around 5 million tons per annum. And therefore, the average injection rate capacity of facilities under development could well easily double, we expect, in the next decade. Next, please. Infrastructure. So CCS infrastructure development is happening now. As we saw in 2021, CCS networks, sometimes also referred to as hub and clusters, continue to be a primary model of CCS to develop CCS projects, of CCS development. By sharing transport and storage infrastructure, networks help to scale up projects. They help reduce risk and reduce unit costs. Norway's Langskip, otherwise called network, is one such example, which aims to provide enough CO2 storage capacity for several CO2 capture projects. And there are currently 2 CO2 carrier ships under construction that will support Longship's transport operations. CO2 pipelines around the world are also in assessment and development. Again, as an example, with plans being announced in Europe to construct subsea pipelines from Belgium and Germany to Norwegian North Sea. Innovations are taking place on the storage side as well. In Iceland, the CODA project is being developed, which will be mineralizing CO2 in basalt rock formations. And storage licensing has been taken place in a number of countries, some of which are listed here. And last but not least, when we look at the APAC region, the world's first liquefied hydrogen carrier transported hydrogen from Australia for the first time in early 2022. So lots going on the infrastructure front. Next, please. Carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere at the multi-gigaton scale is essential to achieving net zero emissions. And this was underlined once again by the IPCC's early 2022 report on mitigation. Carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, can be achieved through, of course, a combination of nature-based and technology-based solutions. And when we look at the technology-based or engineered CDR options, including bioenergy, we're thinking about bioenergy with CCS BECCS, or direct air capture combined with storage as DACs. And of course, it's that security and the permanence of storage that is associated with, it comes with engineering CDR options, is bringing these 2 technologies, BECCS and DACs, increasingly into focus. At the Institute, we examined the potential role for these 2 technologies, BECCS and DACs, using our global economic model across a range of possible future DACs costs. The results show that the extent of DACs deployment in particular is going to be dependent on the future cost of DACs, which is uncertain at the moment, And the chart that you see on the right, and you can again read the full report or our analysis from this in our global status report, but the chart on the right-hand side shows different DAX deployment amounts based on future modeled costs of DAX. Now, one significant finding is that if the cost of DAX can be reduced to $200 or per ton or below, the total cost of achieving net zero emissions by mid-century, the cost of it would be reduced by more than $1 trillion, a significant benefit to the global economy. DAX also has the benefit of, or the benefits of not being limited by scale or geography. And of course, it can act as a backstop technology for climate mitigation if other pathways or other technologies fail to materialize or fail to materialize to at the level that's expected. And on the CDR front, last but not least, CDR as well as point source captured storage CCS are both needed. I'd like to emphasize they're complementary, and they both require significant investment if we are to achieve our net zero ambitions by the middle of the century. Next, please. Without a doubt, scaling up CCS deployment will require greater financing, commercial financing, bank financing, and investment. There is increased focus that's been placed on the role of green or sustainability-focused taxonomies. And significantly, CCS has already been formally recognized as a green economic activity within the EU's taxonomy, with the subsequent delegated act setting out the technical screening criteria. In addition, carbon markets, both voluntary and compliance markets, will, we believe, become increasingly important in order to accelerate the deployment of CCS, and therefore the mitigation that's delivered through CCS need to be recognized within these markets. We expect to see a convergence between the two, as several other experts and stakeholders, and we believe that rigorous requirements related to additionality, permanence, and verification being put in place in both markets. ESG considerations are also becoming a stronger driver of climate action, and CCS is already reported under ESG reporting schemes, but investors are seeking more detail in disclosures. We expect that new methodologies for reporting CCS under ESG frameworks that provide such detail will be developed in the coming years. And with that, I would like to invite my colleague Jeff to give an overview of the regional developments. Over to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you very much, Guloren. I'm going to go a bit deeper with what is happening in the various regions beyond the highlights that Jarad and Guloren mentioned earlier. North America, and particularly the United States, continues to lead the world in both CCS facilities in operation and those in the development pipeline. In the US alone, there are currently 13 facilities in operation, 2 in construction and over 70 in development, and another 20 plus projects have been announced and are in the very early stages. There are numerous reasons for this, but a primary reason is sustained policy support. And that support continues with numerous new policies enacted over the last 12 months. The big headline, of course, is the Inflation Reduction Act, the sweeping legislation that is the biggest infusion of funding for decarbonization ever provided by the US government and probably any government in the world. It includes numerous supports for CCUS, including significant changes to the tax code, shorthanded here as 45Q, the most prominent of which are an increase in the amount of the tax credit to up to $85 per ton for point source capture and $180 per ton for direct air capture. This is widely viewed as a game changer in the US, as Jarad said, and numerous analyses have indicated that the enhanced 45Q will result in multiples of the number of projects that will now be financially viable. Complementing the IRA is the bipartisan infrastructure law passed late in 2021, which provides $12 billion in funding for various elements of CCUS project development. And there are other policy actions that have occurred recently as well. The other 3 points on the slide are examples of policies that further advance CCUS deployment in the US, and you can read more about them in the status report. Our northern neighbor in Canada has had a very busy year as well. If we go to the next slide, please. And in Canada, one new operating CCUS facility that Guloren mentioned, the Glacier Gas Plant project, is added to their 4 existing operational facilities, and Canada is adopting many supportive policies, both at the federal and provincial levels. In the first quarter of 2022, the government of Canada released its 2030 emissions reduction plan. The plan provides a roadmap for how Canada will meet its current Paris Agreement nationally determined contribution target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45% by 2030 across the Canadian economy, and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Canada seeks to position its industries as green and competitive, and that means creating, in part, a CCUS strategy to incentivize its development and adoption. Following the release of the plan, Canada issued its 2022 federal budget, which provides strong support for CCUS via an investment tax credit. An interesting feature of the credit is that the credit itself is cut in half after 2030, intended to incentivize early investment in CCUS. There's also a mandatory reporting requirement for greenhouse gas emissions that is based on the framework established by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, which should further incentivize companies to decarbonization and CCUS deployment. Beginning in 2023, new clean fuel regulations will come into force with the intent to reduce the life cycle carbon intensity of liquid fuels by 15% by 2030, further incentivizing the deployment of CCUS. And as I said, in addition to federal policy, there's a great deal of activity happening at the provincial level, Alberta being most active in advancing CCUS. The province in late 2021 announced the Alberta Hydrogen Roadmap, outlining Alberta's intentions to become an international leader in clean hydrogen. And in March of this year, the province selected 6 proposals to move forward with developing Canada's first carbon storage hubs. And then earlier this month, they announced the selection of 19 additional storage hub development proposals. So there's a lot going on the policy front in particular, particularly in Canada. So moving now to Europe. And when I say Europe, I'm speaking as an American, so I'm including the United Kingdom, as well as continental Europe, and for that matter, Iceland as well. 2022 was another year of substantial increases in projects and development across the continent. And as Guloren mentioned previously, Europe added 1 new operating facility this year, the Orca facility in Iceland, a direct air capture project. And the Langskip project in Norway continues to advance with the capture facility at the Brevik cement plant under construction, and the Northern Lights storage facility off the west coast of Norway preparing to receive CO2 from multiple sources. There are currently more than 70 commercial projects underway in Europe, nearly doubling the total from a year ago. Again, supportive government policy underpinned by the European Commission's target of climate neutrality by 2050 is driving investment in CCUS. But in contrast to the US and Canada, where policy incentives are provided to the broad market and the private sector largely determines which projects move forward, in Europe, it's a much more of a partnership approach, with governments providing funding for specific projects and hubs. The European Union's Innovation Fund is investing in 11 carbon capture and storage and carbon utilization projects. And that funding is supplemented by country-level incentive programs. In the Netherlands, a program called SDE++ provides funding for renewable energy and CO2 reduction projects, including CCUS. In 2022, the government announced that it would more than double the amount available through that program from 5 billion euros to 13 billion euros. The Porthos project, which aims to capture CO2 from various sources at the port of Rotterdam and store it offshore, has been allocated 2 billion euros from SDE++, excuse me. The Danish government has been particularly active in supporting CCUS recently, and in 2022, they've allocated 5 billion euros to advance CCUS over the next 10 years. Denmark has Europe's most ambitious climate target of 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 economy-wide, and they see CCUS as essential to achieving that goal. In the UK, following a £1 billion announcement in 2020 to develop CCUS clusters through the UK government's CCS infrastructure fund, the first 2 networks of a planned 4 recipients of the grant were announced in late 2021, those being the HyNet cluster and the East Coast cluster. Scotland's CCS project, Acorn, was identified as a backup to those Track 1 clusters. And then in August of 2022, as part of the Track 1 clustering process, the UK government announced a short list of 20 CCUS capture projects that may receive government funding if those projects are determined to represent value for money for the UK taxpayer. The UK government aims to capture and store 20 to 30 million tons of CO2 across these 4 networks by 2030. And in addition to the big 4, Norway, the Netherlands, Denmark, and the UK, policy support and interest in CCUS is growing in numerous other countries across the continent. Moving then to the Middle East and North Africa, this region remains the world's largest oil exporting region and is seeking to maintain its energy exports, including hydrogen, into the future. There are 3 facilities in operation in the region, a gas liquefaction plant operated by Qatargas called Ras Laffan, the Hawiyah natural gas liquids plant operated by Saudi Aramco, and El Riyada, capturing and storing CO2 from a steel plant in Abu Dhabi, operated by ADNOC. Collectively, they're capturing about 4 million tons of CO2 per year. Looking forward, this region has the potential for significant further CCUS funding and deployment. It has large geological storage resources, oil and gas and petrochemical industry experience, and the recognition by national governments of the role of CCUS in emissions mitigation. Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have all included CCUS in their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And their national interests are well served by technologies such as CCUS that can reduce emissions from the production and use of fossil fuels. Both government and the private sector see the changing expectations of their international customers, both for their conventional petroleum products and the potential for this region to become a leading global supplier of low carbon hydrogen. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt announced the establishment of voluntary carbon markets in their countries and fully regulated carbon exchange and trading schemes. The presence of various carbon markets, as Guloren mentioned, is expected to benefit all decarbonization technologies, including CCUS. Moving now to the Asia-Pacific region. There is a lot of activity in this region on the policy, regulatory, and project fronts. China, of course, announced its high-level climate goals in 2020, carbon peaking by 2030 and climate neutrality by 2060. And these goals continue to drive action within the national and provincial governments, among state-owned enterprises, and in the private sector. China has what they refer to as their 1+N policy framework, which includes a high-level set of principles plus more specific sub-plans. And in this framework, CCUS has a significant role in meeting the country's climate targets. China's first 1 million ton per year CCUS project came into full operation just this past August, and construction has begun on a 1.5 million ton per year CCUS facility on a coal-fired power plant. Both of these projects are being run by state-owned enterprises, and while SOEs are driving early advances in CCUS, more policy support will be required to bring CCUS to scale in the coming years. Japan continues to drive regional collaboration by necessity, since the country has very limited CO2 storage resources of its own. Its draft CCS roadmap reflects a goal to capture up to 240 million tons of CO2 by mid-century. Japan is working with Asia-Pacific countries on bilateral and multilateral agreements to make its CCUS ambitions a reality. Singapore, likewise, has limited CO2 storage capacity, so in order to decarbonize its heavy industry, it too is building partnerships with Southeast Asia nations. Indonesia's path for CCS deployment includes a combination of project-level capture and storage and becoming that regional storage hub that other countries will need. and their regulations and policies are in development. Next slide, please. Malaysia is also seeking to become a regional hub for CO2 storage. Malaysia has a couple of large offshore CCUS projects in development, and regulations and policy are advancing in parallel. In Australia, CCS was included in the Carbon Crediting Emissions Reduction Fund in 2021. CCS projects continue to progress in the country, with several efforts and feasibility studies being led by companies in the energy sector, most notably the Middle Arm Hub in the Northern Territory, the Moomba CCUS project in South Australia, and CarbonNet in Victoria. In Thailand, national oil and gas operator PTTEP announced that it's moving forward with plans to launch the country's first CCUS project, with the aim to be operational by 2026. And in Cambodia and Vietnam, CCUS is also part of the climate and economic development agendas. So as you can see, there's a great amount of activity happening all around the world. So now just a quick look at international policy and regulation before I wrap up. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change continues to highlight the importance of CCS producing analyses that demonstrate that the technology is necessary, effective, and viable. 21 countries now include CCS in their NDCs, and the vast majority of those countries who submitted long-term low emissions development strategies also included CCS. As I mentioned just previously, transboundary CCS activities are steadily gaining ground, and we expect that trend to continue in the years to come. Next slide, please. The CCS story in 2022 shows clear movement from ambition to action, with over 190 CCS projects in the pipeline in 26 countries. It's clear that governments, the private sector, and the scientific community around the world see CCUS as an essential tool to address climate change. But despite the progress, we have a long way to go. As you've heard, CCS capacity will need to increase by more than 100-fold by 2050 to meet climate targets. And this will require durable commitment and increasing investment from governments, corporations, technology developers, service providers, and financiers to get CCS deployed at scale and enable it to achieve its full potential. And with that challenge, let me turn it back over to Guloren to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And could I please invite our speakers? We're very pleased today to be joining us to discuss the value of CCS and CCS in their progressive countries and regions. Alex Milward, who's the Director of CCUS at the UK's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We've got Brad Crabtree, who's the Assistant Secretary with the Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Fuel and Fossil Energy, and Carbon Management from the US. And we have Chris Bolesta, CCUS Policy Lead at the European Commission. Very welcome to all of you. Alex, if I can start with you, please. And I'd like to ask the same question to all three of our speakers, but Alex, if I could start with you, could you tell us a little bit about the progress of CCS, CCUS in the UK over the past 12 months?
Very happy to. And first of all, say thank you very much to GCCSI and for sharing that outlook, which has got me extremely excited. It's just fantastic to see the accelerating global progress of CCUS, and Jarad pointing out 244 megaton per annum added to the pipeline is just great. I've often described our program in the US as a program of 5,000 to support the nearing 70 million people in the UK, but actually from this audience I realize actually we're a program of 500,000 people all working together to try and help the soon to be 8 billion people on the planet. So yeah, that is just incredibly exciting to see that progress and come back to. One of the things sort of not really in the last 12 months, but again an important anchor, particularly for us in the UK at the moment, and you'll have all seen the headlines, but an important anchor during this has been the UK enshrining the net zero legislation into law. and having the independent advice from the Committee for Climate Change showing that CCUS contributes to the lowest cost pathway to net zero, which has been really, really important in getting that cross-party support here and maintaining that. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Like many other countries, we do see the economic benefit of carbon capture overall. Probably just before the 12-month window, we did set up what's called the North Sea Transition Deal. So a large part of what we see CCUS contributing is a transition pathway, particularly for oil workers, as that will inevitably reduce, and to be able to sort of create the new industry for them to transition into rather than sort of dissipate. We've done a huge amount internationally. Had a delegation over from the US both last week and this week, and Malaysia and many other places who are all sort of working incredibly hard to do that. And what we want to do in the UK is certainly where we played a significant role in industrializing the world and with it carbonizing it. We'd like to play a role in contributing to decarbonizing it as well. And I'm incredibly proud to hear from so many people about the work that we publish, and it's all available, all the policy work that we do. Too many to list in just the last 12 months alone, but everything that we do is all published, and more is coming. I don't know the total digital page count, but it's many, many thousands, and it's saving millions of dollars of development for different countries around the world. So we're really excited about trying to get the lowest cost pathway to net zero for the world as well. I think as Jeff pointed, and so within that, we've sort of laid out a deployment plan as well, which sort of provides a lot more detail than I can share in these few minutes. And do feel free to get in touch with us or our team. Very happy to share the experiences that we're having. I do say there's an awful lot to do yet. We haven't stored any CO2 in the UK, whereas as we heard, the US has, Norway has, and have done a huge amount. But there's also, as Jeff points, a lot to do globally, and that we should be doing together. Not everybody supports carbon capture as the route to net zero, and I think it's important for us all to work together to bring everyone along this journey as well as we can, and I think we can do that together for society. And I think to get that lowest cost pathway, there's more that we all need to do together on international standards and modularization and product standards and transport standards and as we seek to get the optimum balance between where the world's CO2 is emitted and where we can cost effectively capture and store it. So I'll sort of pause there and just sort of say, very much looking forward to working with the international community to deliver global CCS.
Thanks very much, Alex. And you mentioned bipartisan support, and of course, US is another place where we actually have had bipartisan support for CCS. And Brad is somebody who's worked towards it for a long time now. And Brad, if I can turn over to you to hear a bit more about the US.
Great, thank you, Guloren, and thanks to you and the whole GCS team for yet another great global status report. It's really the gold standard for work in this arena. Really appreciate it, and it's so nice to see such a great turnout for this event around the world. I just start by noting that we're meeting at a really challenging time in the world, but for the first time in many, many years, it's a really optimistic one for carbon management. After so many challenges and so many years of false starts, I would say that the momentum in the United States, but as you've seen in Europe and increasingly in Asia and Southeast Asia, the momentum is really palpable. And so it's just very exciting. What I would say in the United States is obviously in the overview that you and Jeff provided, you emphasized the bipartisan infrastructure law and the $12 billion of investments in the demonstration of carbon capture, carbon management technology and infrastructure. Another $8 billion for the development of regional clean hydrogen hubs, one of which will have to feature hydrogen produced from fossil energy with carbon capture and storage. One of the exciting things for us, it's not just the scale of these resources, which are unprecedented in the United States. It's also for the first time, we've really expanded research and development to include large-scale commercial demonstration. And that's a major policy change in the United States. It's long overdue and needed to really ramp up deployment of carbon management technologies across the economy. The other thing I would flag that maybe wasn't emphasized quite as much in the overview, and I'm very, very optimistic, excited about the hub approach that's really built into the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's $2.5 billion in federal funding for the development of dedicated regional geologic storage sites. We're estimating that there will be 20 to 40 such sites developed. Each will have to store at least 50 million metric tons of CO2 over 30 years, but we expect many to store substantially more than that. And then this geologic storage program is going to work in tandem with what we're calling the Carbon Dioxide Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Authority, or CFIA. And that will provide $2.1 billion in low interest loans and grants that will leverage much greater sums of private capital to directly finance the deployment of CO2 transport infrastructure. Again, on a hub basis, bringing together carbon capture, direct air capture, carbon conversion projects, tying them to storage. And the real goal with that is that we can finally get beyond this historic chicken and egg challenge where, you know, you develop a carbon capture project, but how do you get the transport done? Who develops the storage site? That we can build out this ecosystem in an integrated way on a regional basis, importantly to reduce costs and ultimately so we can bring carbon management to climate scale. The other thing that's been mentioned, but it's worth recapping, is all those investments in the infrastructure bill are complemented by the Inflation Reduction Act, which has several $100 billion in clean energy and industrial tax credits over a 10-year period. The 45Q tax credit is the one that will incentivize carbon capture, direct air capture, and carbon conversion projects. It's not only a 10-year window that companies will now have to begin construction of projects, but as was noted, they'll have up to $85 a ton for capturing and storing CO2 from industry and power generation, and $180 for direct air capture, which, you know, has been said, we hope will be transformative. But what's really exciting is the interplay between these two policies. The other thing I would note is we now have a different dynamic going on in the world today, which is where I think the efforts in the United States and in Europe and other regions are feeding on each other. There's a really healthy collaboration and friendly competition going on. I would note that some of the commitments that were mentioned in the overview presentation, the fact that Norway, the Netherlands, the UK, and others have been committed to investing billions of dollars in CO2 transport and storage hubs and the associated carbon capture. That really inspired us in the United States to put together the SCALE Act, which provides the $5 billion for CO2 transport and storage in the United States, which got put into our infrastructure bill. Had it not been for that leadership in Europe, I don't think we would have been as inspired or as emboldened to do as much as we have. And I hope that continues to go both ways. We really need to get into a dynamic of increasing ambition around climate. And then finally, I would just make the point that we need to get implementation right. And clearly, as Alex just pointed out, not all stakeholders and communities are supportive of carbon management technologies. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what these technologies can and cannot do, but there's also some real legitimate concerns about how these investments will benefit in real tangible ways communities economically and environmentally. So I think that's something we really have to focus on going forward, and we are doing so here through the Department of Energy and the various programs we're implementing.
Thanks very much, Brad. Indeed, US had some very serious, very impressive policy financing, etc. policies being put in place in the last year, crowned almost sort of last, but hopefully not least, the IRA. But it was also kind of really inspiring to hear your comment about collaboration and friendly competition across regions and how the US has been inspired by Europe, which brings me, of course, over to Chris Bolesta, who's been working tirelessly over the years in pursuit of carbon capture in Europe. And we've heard a little bit about kind of the funding in progress, but also there's a lot that's happening on the hub and clusters in Europe about strategy, etc. Can I hear from you, Chris, about what's been going on within what's kept you really busy over the past 12 months?
Thank you, Guloren. And first of all, congratulations on excellent piece of work. Again, that's really a sustainable publication now. Every year the community is looking forward to what's in the report. So that's another job well done. And I'm really glad hearing that Europe was part of the inspiration for tools, such excellent tools as Q45. That's good to hear. In Europe, of course, we made significant strides helping CCS last year, and we already heard from your colleague quite a few things. That the project count doubled, and that's really great. I wish we could work in simpler times. I think if it wasn't for the invasion of Russia on Ukraine, this file would be even more impressive in terms of numbers and money invested. So that will hopefully happen next year. In terms of what we did last year, I think just wanted to drum up even more our flagship investment tool, which is the Innovation Fund. 2 years ago we started, and that was 4 CCS projects. This year we added another 7, and out of these 7, 3 are CCU, large-scale projects, and 4 are CCS. And out of these 4 CCS, 2 are cement plants, 1 is a lime production, and 1 is a very interesting project you already mentioned. So storage into basalt rock formation. That's a unique project, and we are hoping that this will be a very nice thing to demonstrate and to increase our storage capacity in the world. Apart from support, direct support to projects capturing and storing carbon, we also realize how important it is to have infrastructure deployment. And so this year, a flagship project of supporting CO2 transport infrastructure has been updated in Europe, and now we can also support as projects of common interest storage of CO2. So call for proposals will open any day now, and I hope we get many projects wanting to become projects of common interest in terms of CO2 storage. And we also looking beyond that, trying to make sure that there's enough in terms of regulatory environment for these projects, and trying to see what the optimum outline of the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure should be in Europe. So we have 2 studies going on precisely on the regulatory outlook and on the outline of EU-wide CO2 storage and transport. And I guess that was just for me as a start. I would also like to invite everyone to join our annual conference on CCS. It will take place in Oslo on 27 and 28. Crabtree will speak there as well, so already one participant there, and you'll be conducting one of the panels. So I hope that's another mainstay of the CCUS landscape for the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And one question that I'd like to ask to all of our speakers, and then perhaps I can start with you, Chris, and go backwards this time, is we talked about the past 12 months. When we look forward to the next 12 months, what do you expect to see in the CCS landscape? In particular, what are you looking forward to? And if there is anything that you find worrying, and if there's anything that keeps you awake at night, you can say nothing, but
well, no, it keeps me awake at night that I'll have so much work, because I think that CCS and CCU will develop even faster than this year. We'll have certainly a lot of things going on in the European Commission, trying to put together a sort of a strategy vision for CCS and CCU. That will be a very, very well, cool task, I would say, and I'm looking forward to that, although I'm worried a bit as well. And I think that another wave of projects will come, because we will have another call for proposals from the Innovation Fund, and that will be a record-breaking €2 billion. So I think there'll be plenty of things going on.
So lots of work.
Yes.
Sounds great to me. Brad, over to you.
So I guess my response is similar to Chris's. I would say it's implementation. On the private sector side, we have companies in the United States really pushing hard to develop projects in the midst of all the supply chain and labor market challenges that all industries are facing right now. So there's going to be a huge effort at deployment that will be moving forward there. On the finance side, we need to see the finance of these projects mature and develop so it becomes almost commoditized like it currently is with wind and solar. On the governmental side, we are still in the midst of rolling out the various infrastructure bill funding provisions and close to completing that process, and applications are coming in now, and that's just an enormous endeavor that's over 5 years. We've also, in terms of the tax credits, have committees set up with the Internal Revenue Service to implement the tax credit package as quickly as possible. The final point I would make is that I also really think that the next year and beyond is going to focus more and more on the community side and community engagement. When we look at the levels of deployment that we need to have to meet our climate goals, not just with carbon management, but with renewables and all the other technologies and associated infrastructure, we just have to do a much better and more comprehensive job of engaging communities so that we have that broad societal support for the deployment of these technologies, which are essential to meet the climate challenge.
Thank you, and certainly thank you for flagging community engagement, which is again something that we kind of at the Institute are sort of very closely involved with and looking to do more work on in order to progress the deployment of CCS. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, no, I'd share Chris's comments that the reward of good work is more good work, which is fantastic, and our team is super enthusiastic to do so. So next year, we're certainly hoping to lay down the detailed foundation in our legislation that underpins all of our business models and the different parts of the value chain, including transport and storage. We will have published yet more thousands of digital pages of business models across the transport and storage, as I say, the industrial power carbon capture, power BECS underneath it, and direct air capture as well. So across a mix of different technologies. We'll have published by then the codes which allow the industries to interoperate with each other, including, dare I say it, what happens when things don't work quite as we'd like. We have to sort of think about those things. Geology is a fickle friend at times, and so what happens in those instances? It's a tough economic environment, and what happens in those circumstances. So some of the codes, and again, very proud to be able to share that with the world. We hope that we'll be very close to agreeing contracts with the Track 1 clusters, what we call clusters, and all the various contracts therein between public and private sector underpinning that. And for those who aren't in that Track 1, and I've had some questions from some of the audience already, I'm hopeful, but you need to sort of stay tuned that we'll have been launching the Track 2 process in 2023, but there's still some decisions that ministers need to take over here.
Thanks, Alex. So can we say that we expect more momentum, which is wonderful, which therefore translates into more work for all of us. So But with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers, the three speakers. I know, thank you so much for taking time from your busy days and joining us today. So that's much appreciated. And we've just gone past the hour. So that's all the time we have today. To our viewers, we very much appreciate your being here. And there were a number of questions on this already, but if you missed any part of today's events or wanted to have a look back on today's conversation, the presentation, comments from speakers, a full recording will be made available on the Institute's website in a few days. The Global Status of CCS 2022 report is now free to download on status22.globalccsinstitute.com. It doesn't quite easily roll off my tongue, and a PDF will be made available later in the week. Download will be available later in the week. Thanks again for your questions. We'll look to get back to you in the following days, and thanks again for joining us. Goodbye.